Hundreds of people have demonstrated in a southern Afghan town accusing NATO troops of killing 4 children during a gunfight with insurgents. It's the latest episode and a major setback in the relations between the US and Afghanistan in the past months, and comes as President Obama arrives on an unannounced trip to cement the country's future relations. Well, for more on all of this, now let's talk to political analyst Sukant Chandan. He is in London. Well, let's start with President Obama's trip. What does he need to do to restore what are clearly quite battered relations now between the NATO forces and the Afghan people?
President Obama can do nothing to restore any form of positive relationships again between the NATO forces and the Afghan people particularly, or even President Karzai, who only last year threatened to join the Taliban. I mean, it's International Workers' Day, and no one suffers more than working people of the Global South, particularly the poor people of Afghanistan, who are suffering the 4th decade now of war that's visiting their country. Tragically, they've been victim to all kinds of atrocities by the NATO occupation forces, be it from the massacre just a month ago of 17 villagers, supposedly by just one US Army personnel, probably by more, with NATO occupation forces posing with dead Afghans, etc. These truly are the veritable wretched of the earth.
So is it time for those forces to withdraw before 2014, or do they have a role up until then, and indeed after that time?
Well, they should have withdrawn a long time if Afghanistan is to really begin the baby steps towards any type of nation building and stability internally and with its neighbours. But frankly, I think it's quite clear that there's going to be a civilian and definitely military presence after 2014, which will be much less than the occupation numbers that we're seeing now, which is around 80,000. But it's clear that NATO want to use Afghanistan, like they've used Libya, as a launching pad for further regime change. And that, Clinton and Obama have already said that they're shifting focus to war and containment against China in the Pacific, and Afghanistan will be a fundamental part of that war campaign.
There have been possible peace talks between the US and the Taliban. Do you think after the troops have left that the Taliban should take power? Is that the will of the Afghan people, and is that really a good thing for Afghanistan?
I think there's several factors at play here now. NATO have opened up an office for the Taliban in Doha, in Qatar, which is basically a form of bribery as well. See, the Taliban movement is split. The Taliban is not a monolithic organization with a central leadership. Taliban basically means any patriotic forces in Afghanistan that want to fight the occupation. So really, when they killed bin Laden was removed for a very specific purpose, because bin Laden was just frankly too anti-imperialist in the Al-Qaeda, which has alliances with Mullah Omar in Afghanistan. And you have to remember, the people of Afghanistan, like the people of South Asia in general, don't, like a lot of the Arabs, hold a lot of kind of illusions about what NATO can achieve. For example, the Taliban opposed the NATO intervention in Libya, didn't denounce Gaddafi at all, but just said it's another attack on a Muslim country, and Muslims should be very wary of this. So really, again, like I said, NATO want to push away the anti-imperialist kind of currents within the Taliban, within the Afghan resistance, and want to maintain and bolster a collaborationist regime post-2014 for the other regime change operations against Russia, China, and also India.
Just explain what that regime would actually be made up of. What do you mean by that?
Well, there was a reason why they got rid of the PDPA government back in the 1980s. The PDPA government was progressive. It saw a mass land reform, education program, a liberation of women. So what they've instituted basically through war and intervention in Afghanistan is a regime that's hostile to all its neighbors, particularly China and Russia, and also that's playing a dirty game in Pakistan. The West are also very nervous about Pakistan. And also with the Libya connection, Gaddafi always supported Pakistan's right to nuclear capability. So really, the West want a regime in place in Afghanistan that can continue this destabilizing and traumatic history that the Afghan people have unfortunately and tragically been seeing for the last several decades.
Yet we are seeing Russia cooperating with the NATO campaign at the moment, recently opening up more access into the country. Clearly, Russia very concerned about the instability there in Afghanistan, and is there to support what's happening at the moment.
Absolutely, and I think Russia are playing the correct game. I mean, Russia has a Eurasian strategy to oppose US hegemony, and they have to get their hands dirty to some extent in Afghanistan if they're going to play a role there. Same with China, same with the Central Asian republics. But one thing remains clear, to quote the Predator, the sequel to Predator, and also the rapper Ice Cube, they quote the same thing. There's no stopping what can't be stopped, and there's no killing what can't be killed. And what can't be stopped and what can't be killed is the inevitable historical progress of removing US hegemony from the world scene and the faith of our peoples and our loyalty to our ancestors to find liberation and independence in Afghanistan.
Let's just talk about the sentiment amongst the Afghan people at the moment, back to those demonstrations today. Do you think that there's any way that relations could improve at all between the occupying forces, or do you think in this timescale now, up until 2014, when the combat troops leave, things could get even worse? We'll see even more problems and tensions between both parties.
Absolute, Bill, and I'm not saying that you're saying this, but it would be an absolute insult to expect the Afghan people to have anything but hostility and resistance to NATO, seeing the way these Afghan people are treated by NATO. I mean, Afghanistan is one of the poorest countries in the world, and such is the absolute kind of disgusting way in which the Afghan people are treated, that the dead Afghan people as a result of the NATO occupation aren't even counted. These people don't even count as human beings. These in the eyes of NATO, are children and people of a lesser God. The Afghan people and peace-loving people around the world won't accept that.
Thank you very much indeed. Sukant Chandan, political analyst and journalist, live there in London. Thanks for your thoughts.